The Department of Transportation in Seattle will not allow us to put that curb cut so close to the intersection of 23rd and Madison. It's too close to the sidewalk, it's a stacking distance problem, and it's a safety problem. And it's not essentially acceptable. So we've had to abandon that idea and go back to providing a ramp that drops 15 feet inside the building to our low-level parking garage here. So this little diagram here shows us what our garage initially looked like. And then by having to do a ramp down there, we've lost almost half of our parking. So effectively, that reduces how much we can develop on the site, how many units of assisted living we can do. And ultimately, that's turned out being a 40% reduction in our development capacity. The other downside of saving the trees is also our loading berths, which are the loading dock areas for the facility, have to be out on the street because we have nowhere else to put it, as well as an accessible van parking stall. And probably the worst condition is that covered porte cochere drop-off area I talked about, is we have to put it out on this corner. And it compromises probably the best opportunity for placemaking and architecture on the site. And it's kind of a shame to ruin that opportunity by putting a drive-through in there that's covered to drop everybody off. So in 3 dimensions, this scheme would look something like this with a drive-through right there on that corner. And excuse me, and the unsafe garage entrance down at the lower end of the site was down there, which no one wants to do. So that doesn't work for us. We've lost a lot of development capacity, but we studied another option, our second scheme. This one starts off with a strong second floor that is in a V shape, and that helps us get enough units to meet our programmatic needs. But at the same time, it also creates kind of an odd shape in the back of the building. And also, we'll show you our preferred scheme here in a second. The main floor amenity areas and the amount of commercial space is also compromised by this scheme as well. But what we were able to do was to get a driveway up here and ramps down here outside of the building to get our parking underneath the building, so we have enough for the code required parking. So in 3 dimensions, the downside of this scheme is that we get a very long street wall, and this is what I coined the bread loaf solution. A lot of multifamily projects in this town have been criticized for being so long and monotonous along one side, and this is over 300 feet long. And so we found that that's not such a great solution. It's nicer on the 22nd side because it does break things up over there, but that street wall is less than 200 feet. So this is a big downside of the project. Plus there's that odd shaped piece. A number of the units end up looking back into each other when we do this little V shape inside of there. And again, we get the long street wall. The other downside is our memory garden, which is essential to be in the sun. We only have room for it up here on the north side of the site. So it sticks into that L3 property that we have. And it's not essentially big enough for us. So this one doesn't work very well either. So we go to our preferred scheme. This one works very well for our program, but it also has lots of public benefits. We have our undercover drop-off area. All the loading is done on-site. All the maneuvering for the loading is on-site underneath the building. We have a ramp down to the lower parking garage. And by clustering all the building off to this side, all the site up here can be dedicated to some kind of landscape amenity. And it could be some kind of open space or some kind of feature that is yet to be determined, but it's an opportunity that isn't there in the other schemes. We also have more generous ground level of commercial space. We'd like to probably put it here on the corner. And we'll, of course, improve the streetscape because there's no trees on 22nd Avenue here. There's only some grass out there, so that's a great opportunity for rain gardens and trees to replace the trees we've taken off that were on site initially. And of course, we put more trees back on this side as well. So on the upper floor, the massing is an L shape. And one of the nicest features is our memory garden is now facing south on the 2nd floor on a little podium that looks out onto Madison and onto the view. So a little more detail there is, this is the configuration we like. It's a much less street wall. It's not that 300-foot long bread loaf. And on the 22nd Avenue side, we've still articulated, put some bay windows of some sort, and articulated the massing so it's broken up, but it's only the 200-foot long side. Let me go back to this earlier illustration. So the site development we can do on this as well is improve the whole context along Madison, because that is a pedestrian-oriented street, and but it's not terribly nice to walk on, because it's a very narrow sidewalk. We're talking about widening that at least 2.5 feet down in this area, and we have a step back in the building this entire length, so we can have about 15 feet from curb to building to either do landscaping, do some outdoor seating areas with maybe some tables and chairs, or a variety of other things, and we'd love to get more of your input on what should happen out there. We've also got a little bit of a buffer on this side and a very generous area for landscaping and rain gardens on that side as well. So this is the benefit of doing this scheme, is there is a nice open area next to the more sensitive parts of the site that are more residential and lower scale. That's one of the design guidelines, is to look after your adjacent context. So another benefit to this project is we were able to take 10 feet out of this, have a 10-foot setback on the site at the ground level, so we don't encroach on this adjacent property. The other two schemes had to go right up to that property edge. So in conclusion, for our three different options, we can't do the scheme with the trees for all the reasons I explained. The second option is the long street wall, the bread loaf condition of over 300 feet, the odd shape, and the compromised ground field program. So in our preferred option, the third one, we get this nice L-shaped scheme, the breaking up of the mass, the nice street proportions on Madison, a better human scale, another guideline issue that I think you saw in the 3D version. 5 more minutes? Okay. And a generous ground level amenity area and our nice amenity landscape feature in the back against the L3 zone. So another issue we wanted to share with you is that we looked at different ramp configurations, and the one we have in our preferred scheme is nice and straight, although we did look at one that was a little less steep, but it did not result in much amenity area back here, so we definitely like this one much better. This one avoids one of the departures we're going to talk about in a second, is that our curb cut met code at 22 feet, but in this configuration it needed to be 30 so we could get the right maneuvering and everything. So let me talk about departures. We have 4 departures. The first one is pretty simple. The delivery vehicles and all the garbage trucks are only about 12 feet 1 inch tall. There's a clearance requirement for this facility, but the code requires 14 feet. We don't need that much, so we're just asking for 1 less foot at 13 feet. The second issue is street level uses. In a pedestrian zone facing a principal pedestrian street, residential uses may not exceed 20% of the street level facing facade. Well, we have residential uses composed of a majority of street level, street facing facade, but the rationale is they're active uses. This is almost like a commercial facility. There are no residents living on that lower level. We'll have a very transparent first floor. You can see right in, and by the widening of the sidewalk and all the other public realm improvements, we think that we've actually met the requirement in a good manner. And also the other part of it is all that activity puts the eyes on the street in that location. And one other justification is across the street at the Safeway, it's been there for many years. They have all this retail. It's been empty the entire time. It's very hard to lease some retail in the edges of commercial districts, and rather than having to wait, we can keep that activated right away. And we do provide some commercial space to make this mixed use as well, so we're not completely leaving that off the table. So the third departure is street level parking shall be separated from street level. Excuse me. That one has to be explained on this diagram here. We have a little bit of parking here, but it's enclosed and screened, and that's a departure that we can put lots of landscaping, green wall, or whatever kind of screening element. It's just part of the function. We don't have a backside of the building, so this is where a drop-off, the secure drop-off and loading had to go, and that ended up being a departure in that configuration. So our last departure is curb cut size. And as I showed you earlier, the curb cuts had to be a little bit bigger because this does function more like a commercial facility. We're required to have 2 large loading doors. And This ends up being about 32 feet instead of the allowed 22. And this one is, we made this 15 feet rather than 10. Those are residential requirements. We're trying to do a facility that needs to have all its on-site